So I use the term secret web designer because I do a lot of web design for my own projects, but I would never, ever, ever let clients know that I do web design. Because as anyone knows, as soon as you introduce clients into the scheme, like it just ruins the whole process. But I really do love doing web work. So I'll start with a couple of the projects that are probably the reasons why you might know of my work or maybe have seen before on the internets. So the first project that I did that really sort of got me into the sphere where people actually gave a shit about what I was doing and who I was Daily Drop Cap. So in 2009, I was working for Louise Feely, who's like a wonderful designer in New York, but I was ready to kind of branch out on my own. And I was doing a lot of illustration work at the time and knew that I wanted to do a lot more lettering work. I had been incorporating it into my illustration work, but I wasn't sure how I was going to get lettering work as like a freelance thing. So I started Daily Drop Cap and with the goal of doing 12 alphabets in total, and I would work through the alphabet A through Z one at a time. So the whole project was going to take maybe like a little over a year, and about halfway through the project I was completely spent on the alphabet, but continued with it, and it ended up being just kind of a completely career-changing thing to do. So people started to really take notice. People started to email me all the time about how much the project inspired them to do their own daily projects. And people really started to know me as someone that drew letters instead of someone that drew like cats hanging out and penguins with bathing suits on. So here's the total of the project. And when I started, I had no idea how big of an impact this would really have on my career. I just started it as like a thing to keep me drawing letters every day. Like I knew that there would be work that I was working on just for money, just because I had to pay the bills. And I wasn't sure that I'd be able to do the kind of stuff that I wanted to do every day, so I wanted to kind of guarantee that at least 20 minutes to an hour of my day was guaranteed doing something that I really wanted to do. But the byproduct of this was that people started to really take notice for me, and it ended up becoming this amazing lookbook of the kind of styles that I could work within. And as a letterer and illustrator, what you don't really realize is, like when you're a designer, they tell you to like curate your portfolio down to like this really fine point that really shows the work that you do. But when you're an illustrator or letterer, the larger your portfolio is, the kind of easier it is to deal with people. Because not everyone is an incredibly talented art director, and if you have a portfolio that people can point to and say, I like this, I don't like this, I like this, I don't like this, it's so much easier to work with clients. So I stopped getting sort of art direction that was like, make the squiggle thing less 80s, and started getting more art direction that was like, I like the R from that alphabet, can you do that but spell out this word? And I was like, thank you. Everything is easy now, but not really, because it's never easy. So that project begat so many lettering projects, and it really did exactly what I sort of wanted it to do, was to help me to do lettering every day. So really, like, side projects can be such an important part of your career because it's really hard to show through client work the kind of work that you want to be future doing sometimes. Because I know that in my career still, I deal with like the insane design by committee nonsense that you guys all hate doing, that I hate doing, when you send the file along and they send it back to you all taped together and weirded out, and you're like, I don't understand why you're doing this, but fine, I just want it to be over. But side projects really show the world like what you actually want to be doing, and you can hopefully guide your career to do more of that. So another side project that I made is Mom, This Is How Twitter Works, which is a website that explains how to use Twitter to my mom, and to many people's moms, and to many non-moms across the internet. So I actually did make this for my mom, and a bunch of feminist bloggers thought that I was being really derogatory towards women when I made it, because they were like, way to pin like moms as being non-tech savvy, and I was like, my mom had an iPad before any of us did. Like, she was the first iPad owner, I swear. So I actually did make this for my mom, and it explains through narrative just how to use like the kind of subtleties of Twitter, and it's something that like I was misusing Twitter like crazy and accidentally airing my dirty laundry to the internet by not replying properly, and I just wanted to make sure that people could actually like learn how to do that stuff. So I love making resources for people, and that's become a major theme of my side projects. Should I Work for Free is a flowchart that I made that went crazy on the internet. People loved this. And I originally just posted it as like a giant JPEG. It was like a 2200 pixel wide JPEG. and all the nerds on the internet were like, oh my god, it's so slow. It takes so long to load. And I was like, it's a giant image, of course it's slow. Like, what do you want me to do? And I could have been lazy, but I was like, this was like bugging me in the back of my head. So I spent 11 hours coding it in HTML and CSS so that they would stop bitching at me about how slow it was. But an awesome thing about that is now it has Google Translate on it, so you can see how to say, like, make it rain bitches in essentially every language under the sun. Which is really fun, but Google Translate bastardizes everything, of course. So a bunch of people have written me, like, offering their free translation service to make it into, like, actually make sense in French and in German and in Spanish. So I should do that at some point, but it's one of those things, like, I'm happy it was a one and done, and that I can just let it be on the internet. Another side project, so procrastinating is a term that I came up with to kind of talk about all these projects that I do, because so much of the work that I do is not actually client work, and I know that you guys are all guilty of this too, because you get really tired of doing the client stuff, or you get really angry, and then you find yourself doodling or find yourself doing something else entirely, and hopefully it's productive, because then it's procrastinating. So, procrastinating, I think, is the key to happiness in your career. Like, you should always have these projects that kind of fill up the time that you don't feel like doing the actual client work for. And they end up being such amazing things for your career and also for, like, you as a human. And people generally write you very nice emails for the things that you do when you're procrastinating. So, this was one of my favorite procrastinating projects. I made a website called Inkerlinker, which is an online database to find printers. So this all started because once people start emailing you, it like just doesn't stop, and then it's endless emails. I probably answer 5 hours of email a day, and half of those emails are people wanting me to refer them to other things, like whether it's another designer or an illustrator or a printer. And honestly, I have not sent all that much stuff to printers, because I worked for Louise Feely and I was not like the print production person there, and then I have done all my own letterpress printing, so I can't actually recommend printers all that well, and Lord knows I would never, ever, ever print something for anyone but myself, because who wants to stand there like turning a crank for 9 hours and not have it be their own project? So I set up this database, and printers can sign up. They just like input their info into a form, which pops into WordPress, and then I approve or disapprove depending on whether or not they sound like a legitimate business or whether or not they sound like a topless bar that's somehow trying to be a printer. But there's almost 500 printers on it now, so if you guys know any printers in Barcelona that you would really recommend, tell them to sign up, because it's totally free for them to sign up and for anyone to use. And the more people that are on it, the better it'll be for everybody to use. And then another helpful side project that I set up was Don't Fear the Internet. So Don't Fear the Internet is a sadly somewhat neglected project because it's so intense for me to have to work on. But I sort of strong-armed my fiance into doing this with me. I just set up the website and I was like, you're making videos with me about how to teach HTML and CSS to people. And he was like, okay. But we're about 6 videos in, and the latest one, I've had the script ready since January, but every video, if you've ever done video work before, to make a 15-minute video takes like 4 years. So the next one is about using type on the web. And they're super fun, and really like, we make stupid metaphors like comparing HTML to hamburgers and stuff like that. So I've gotten wonderful emails from people saying that they learned more in the 25 minutes it took them to watch all of our videos than they learned in some of the college classes that they took, which is really rewarding but also super intimidating, because I'm like, it's not a college class. I hope that you learned something, but now I have to make more. That's what's like so wonderful and terrible about making things that become successful. Like, you have to keep doing them. And I just wish I could be like this idea machine that just threw things into the world and then people just continued it for me. And I think that we all sort of, that's like the dream job that I have. I just work in an office and I'm like, you know what would be excellent? A soft serve ice cream machine that came with sprinkles already in it. And they're like, I'm on it, you know? And I just made that up right now. That just came straight from my brain out my mouth. And then the last side project that I'll show you right now is really fun. All my side projects essentially like fill gaps in either my portfolio, my life, just they fill a gap that I can't actually do. So I use side projects. Most of the work that I do is for like advertising. And if you do any sort of work for advertising that isn't actually within the agency, you are not a thinker. You get brought in to make things, which is wonderful because I love to make things. But at the same time, I feel like everyone just thinks of me as just like this mindless doodler that draws pretty things all day. So a lot of my side projects kind of exercise my brain a little bit more than some of my client work does. But this one was really fun because I found myself at the end of the year kind of looking at my finances and being like, man, I'm doing awesome. This is like, this career thing is working out. I'm talking in Barcelona. Like, that's pretty rad. Woo! Also, I want to both slap and kiss whoever invented foie gras on top of steak. That is like amazing, and I've had it twice since I've been here, and I've only been here since yesterday. But 52 by 52, which was something that I set up as a way for me to sort of like remind myself to donate to charity more often, and also to use stuff like Twitter. Like, I have a bunch of Twitter followers, and if I wanted to, I could just use it to pimp my stuff on the internet or pimp other people's stuff and sell t-shirts and sell blah, blah, blah. But I knew that I wanted to use it for something more than just selling stuff. So I sort of use it as a way to kind of promote other charities, and it's not, I don't take any money, I'm just a megaphone, and every week you can either donate $52, $25, or $10 to whoever you want, and you just make a pledge to do it. You don't make a pledge to anyone but yourself. And then every week I send a charity that I'm donating to and encourage you to do the same, or of course to donate to whomever you wish. So that's a really fun project, and this week's charity is the World Wildlife Fund, just so you know. So the big thing that I learned from like all these side projects, and the thing that I really try and teach other people, is to make things that you wish existed. A lot of people, especially when you're young and you're coming out of school, like you see all these people on the internet that are doing crazy things, and you're like, what's the crazy thing that I can do? And you try and come up with that new side business or that new thing that's going to be like, this will be the next Twitter, or it's Flickr for grandmas, you know, like trying to come up with some successful startup-y something that'll get you 100,000 Twitter followers. But really, what you should do is make something that you wish was real. Like, you never should make anything if you yourself are not excited about it, because the chances of it becoming outrageously successful and filling your bank account with gold coins and blah 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 are like way smaller than you think. None of my side projects, they all cost me money. I have to pay my mom to like maintain Inkerlinker because I can't maintain it anymore. And don't for the internet, I have a donation button on it, but I think I've received a total of $75 in the like 7 months that it's been on. Which, thank you donors if you are in the audience. But, you know, if you make something that you wish was real, if you just have that idea and are like, man, I wish that this thing was out there, and you make it, worst case scenario, that thing is real. So that's like a really wonderful worst case scenario, versus making something that you don't actually care about. Because then worst case scenario, you're really frustrated and you put like 2 years of work into something that you don't give a shit about. So that's a good, solid piece of advice that I can offer to anyone. So anyway, I wasn't always doing this lettering thing. I went to school for graphic design. I will show one student project because it does a really good job of showing my sense of humor and also making everyone a little bit concerned for my emotional well-being. So I made a board game about divorce called Pack Your Baggage. So the goal of the game is to exit your parents' house at the age of 18 with the least amount of emotional baggage. I don't know how many people in this audience are from divorced homes, myself. I will tell you that this is not entirely autobiographical, because then we would have major problems. But I'll let you kind of construe for yourself what is autobiographical and what is not. So it worked a lot like the game of life, except instead of choosing between career and college, you chose between mom and dad. And it worked linearly from age 12 to age 18. So what happened was, at age 12, your parents get divorced, the paths split. You have to choose whether you want to be with alcoholic dad or super religious mom, or negligent dad and hyperactive mom. You know, there's like 10 different personalities to choose from. And this is where the gameplay really happens. Because when you're 12, living with very religious mom is like totally fine, because the worst thing that you're doing is like cheating on a math test, or, oh my god, I kissed a girl. But when you're getting knocked up after prom, or like smoking weed behind the Kmart, like alcoholic dad is probably where you want to be, because he does not give a fuck about what you're doing. So no matter what you chose, you were cool, because whenever the paths crossed over each other, that was a major life event for you, and you could switch switch households, of course at a major emotional baggage penalty, because if anyone's ever switched households, you know that you will never stop hearing about it for the rest of your life. And then whenever the paths crossed over themselves, it was a major life event for your parent, and their personality could switch like that. So you might start with crazy alcoholic dad, and then all of a sudden he's like right-wing Christian nonsense speaker, because he had some epiphany at age 50 or something like that. So that was really where the gameplay happened. And here's what the board game looked like. The center of the center image is the full board game, which, if you notice, makes a very subtle fuck you when you're leaving your parents' house. And then there's close-ups so you can see a little bit of the illustration and the lettering work. But as I said, the goal was to sort of leave your parents' house and have the least amount of emotional baggage, which would sort of determine which place you ended up at. So the ultimate goal, of course, was the luxury loft or something in the city. And then, second to the bottom was probably like Nana's trailer, because it's at least still better than Mom's basement, and Mom's basement is the worst. But my teachers loved this project, but also were like, "Are you okay?" Like every time that I brought in work. So, and my favorite part were these blame it on divorce cards. So you got 2 blame it on divorce cards, which you would save for something really good. Like, if anyone's ever tried this, you're like, "Oh my God, if you were still together, and they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, here's a card," But you had to save it for something outrageously bad that you did, because if you used it on something super easy, like getting caught stealing cigarettes or something, it just wasn't worth it. And so the way that you actually could get baggage taken away is if you caught your parents doing something like smoking weed or fucking your teacher or anything like that. And you would collect this guilt money, which then you would use to pay for therapy to take away baggage. It was genius, right? Totally works. I know that this is everyone's... One of my other favorite parts, and probably the darkest one that everyone was like, when I brought it into the classroom, were the game pieces, which are children dealing with the divorce through various neuroses. So there's a cutter and an overeater and a boy dressed as a girl and a bedwetter. So it was super dark, and my teachers were like, "I don't know if you should do that." Just as I did a children's book that was an Aesop's Fables book that related how the fables relate to your actual life. And for the boy who cried wolf, the last scene in the relatable one was a girl burning in fire. They were like, maybe take that one out. And I was like, "But it's so funny, look, she's calling the fireman and he's not coming." And they're like, "Okay." So anyway, that was college. It worked out. I didn't go to school knowing I wanted to be a designer. I went to school to draw pictures, whatever that meant at the time, because I was a brainless 18-year-old. I didn't know what art school really was. But I happened to end up at a really good school that encouraged me to do a lot of illustration and lettering work, and also a lot of design work, and I left in a good spot. So I worked at Headcase Design in Philly, and while I was working there, I put together this promo of the 12 Days of Christmas, and they had cut my hours to part-time because they weren't sure whether they wanted to take on a full-time employee, and then so I put out this promo to get more freelance work, and it sort of worked and worked terribly at the same time. I didn't hear from a single art director, but I did hear from Louise Feely, who was one of 5 awesome people that I sent it to just randomly, because I was like, "You're awesome, I'm going to send this to you." And she was the only one that wrote me back. And so she called me up for our portfolio review and offered me a job that day. And I had to move to New York in 3 weeks and drop everything, and it was one of the most outrageously cool experiences of my life. So I'll only show 3 slides from Louise's stuff, because you can go to her website and see all of her awesome, crazy nonsense. It's super great. But I worked on this identity for her when I was there. And we worked on a lot of stuff for restaurant identities and food packaging. That's kind of her jam. She does so much of it, which is really great, because her office is beautiful and full of all this awesome packaging. And then also, she would have all these clients that, of course, couldn't pay in real money, because who has clients that pay in real money? So we would get all these weird exchanges, for 4 weeks, all we ate was fancy Indian food. And for another year, it was gelato afternoon every day, So it was sort of awesome. It was not the lightest 2 years of my life, but it was a very excellent 2 years. And we also worked on a lot of these guidebooks, which were really fun, because I got to learn about a lot of parts of the world that I my now future sort of get to go to. Haven't been to Budapest yet, but I really want to go. And it really sort of, I got to exercise so much of my skills while I was working for her, but what I really found was that I ended up loving the process of drawing letters the most of all. So the whole procrastinating thing sort of started, that word kind of came about because I sort of have figured out what I wanted to do in my career just by looking at the things that I do when I'm procrastinating. So when I was in college, I was taking painting and graphic design and sculpture and glass and all these classes at once. But I found myself always procrastinating from the painting work to work on my graphic design projects, and that's how I chose my major in graphic design. And so while I was working for Louise, I found myself procrastinating doing like page layout and identity stuff to focus mostly on doing the lettering work for the identities. So that kind of guided me to want to do more lettering work. And the last thing that I got to work on when I was working at for Louise Philly was this awesome stamp for the Postal Service, which is out now and super rad, because I'm getting married this year and I get to use my own stamp that I made, not some Zazzle stupidness. Yay! I should probably explain why my hand is orange also. If you guys didn't see Josh's awesome mural that he put up, James Victoria wrote next to it, like, "This is Josh's, fuck with it and die." No, he said, "Touch it and be dead," or something like that. And so I painted my hand orange and touched it, and then he wrote "dead" on my hand. So it was like sort of performance art in 15 minutes, a little bit. Closest to performance art I'll probably get since my performance art boyfriend in college that did a lot of like naked nonsense stuff. You guys all had that friend, right? They were like a Matthew Barney disciple and were doing push-ups with nothing on. It was rough. So I totally fell in love with illustration too while I was working for Louise and before when I worked for Headcase. So I went to school to like make drawings and ended up sort of finding my way into it through illustration. And illustration is wonderful to do freelance if you're a graphic designer because unlike graphic design, you don't have to go to meetings. And in general, everybody wants to talk to you on email. And also they sort of assume that you have a day job because who makes a living with illustration? Lots of people do. That is the answer. But most art directors are like, you sit in your pajamas all day. True. You eat goldfish for lunch. True. But illustration is really rad because, for one thing, you get to work with art directors all the time, which is super fun. Because imagine if all of your clients knew what you were doing all the time. Like, when someone hires you as a graphic designer, you have to teach them so much about what your job actually is. And when you're hired as an illustrator, for the most part, you're working with other creatives that are hopefully smart and respectful, not always, but for the most part, they at least know where your role is in the scheme of the project. So I'll show some illustration work that I did. I started off doing just like straight illustration work. This was about a fancy dog hotel in San Francisco, where I now reside. You can tell it's aged by the iPod. Look at iPods in illustrations, and you can like it's the perfect carbon footprint of like wherever it was at the moment in time. But I started incorporating a lot of lettering into my illustration work, and this was so great because editorial work, you can kind of do whatever you want. They send you this article, you learn all this craziness. Like this article was about the fact that when you're 18, your brain is only 80% developed. So I sent them 2 sketches. One was like this super conceptual, not actually that smart one, that was a school portrait with 20% of it rubbed out on the top, and I was like, I'm so smart. And then I look back at it now, I'm like, that's sort of gimmicky. And this one was just a brain environment with teenage things in it, so they chose that one because it was more visually interesting. But I got to do things like write OMG and brain slower downer on the beard and stuff like that. And it was really fun because you get away with a lot of stuff when you do lettering for editorial work versus when you're hired as a letterer. But more and more I started kind of incorporating lettering work into my illustration. This was for an assignment about badmovies.org, which is a B horror movie compendium online. So this is like essentially the same solution, or the same solution, different execution, same concept. So the one on the left is like one of my favorite things I've ever drawn, which is like the creature from the Black Lagoon's head on top of like a Vargas girl holding a machine gun. I kind of want to get it as a tattoo, but I think I will be disengaged if I do that. And the one on the right is like the same thing, like combining all the genres into one massive crazy title. So that's the one that they ended up going with, and Unstoppable Kung Fu Zombie Teenage Bikini Creatures from the Planet Death became a reality. So I started doing this more often. I would show a lettering option, and the more people started seeing lettering work in my portfolio, the more confident they felt in hiring me to do the lettering version. So it's really important. You know, people don't really realize this when you're young. I'm young now, but when I was like 22 and had no idea what I was doing, you put stuff in your portfolio that you're proud of or that you think is your best work, but it's not necessarily stuff that you actually enjoyed doing. Because you're always like, oh my god, I hated every moment of this project, but it's so good. And you keep that in your portfolio when you don't know any better because you think that you should show your best work, but it doesn't matter. Show the work that you actually want to do, because otherwise you're going to be knee-deep in all this crazy work that you hate doing. And that's like particularly true with illustration work, because if you want to major awesome career as an illustrator, draw maps. They're always looking for people to draw maps and diagrams. I honestly get asked like 10 times a month, like, hey, we have this data visual. I'm like, no, I do not want to do that. Go to this person. But if you do that, you will have a good and really boring and tedious career. So, not boring, I mean, if you like it, whatever. But I know that I don't like it. So I started doing all this like illustrative lettering stuff, so which was sort of, it's a really easy continuum to like look at the work that I was doing through time and like how it's kind of evolved and gotten like more boring over time, which is what happens in the type world. The longer you're in it, the more you start looking at these like little subtle things and being like, can you believe how crazy that serif is? And no one's like, I don't see it. Back then I was doing all this really illustrative type work and it was really fun. So these were for 2 different Australian shows. The one on the left was for a calendar. I chose the month of July to do, which is like summer for me and not summer for Australia, so I don't know what I was thinking. But Super Soakers were really big in my childhood. And then Say It With Flowers is what's on the wrapping of any time that you buy flowers from the florist in America. So I like have this Google Doc full of these kind of phrases that I just try to save for a rainy day and then I like never end up doing because it's a Google Doc and who remembers to open it. But I love this illustrative lettering stuff because it really, I get to geek out in little minor ways over and over again throughout the piece. This was for a children's charity, and the theme was hope. So I stuck with something familiar like Charlotte's Web, and then just really wanted to incorporate both lettering and illustration work. So the more I started doing this illustrative lettering stuff, the more I started seeing kind of like themes in my work. And this is a major, major theme, ribbon lettering. So this was sort of my max for a little while. And I loved doing it, but it was one of those things like too much of a good thing is not a good thing sometimes. So for a couple of years there was ribbon type season, in which all I did was ribbon type. And every time I got that phone call from the art directors, they'd be like, I have this idea. It's totally original and brilliant. And I'd be like, wait for it. And then I'd get, type out of ribbon, awesome. But you can't, you gotta be like sincere and, oh, that's a wonderful idea. No, I haven't done that much lately at all. But I'm glad that it's sort of subsided, it's waned a bit. There's less ribbon type happening right now than there was in the past. So with the illustrative lettering stuff, I started to pare it down more and really kind of work with the influences that I got when I was working for Louise. I got to look at all this historical lettering all the time. Like all day I was just filled with looking at books of historical lettering, referencing it for logos and for book covers and all kinds of stuff. So when I left working for her, I had this insane resource of just random visual knowledge in the back of my head to kind of work from. And more I started incorporating the more vintage type into my work. And so it started off being kind of illustrative, and then it sort of got pared down to where people couldn't really tell whether it was like a typeface that I had worked with or whether it was original. I swear it's almost all original. Sometimes you use typefaces when there's not enough time. But it was really fun, and I loved kind of referencing different things. This is, of course, referencing the awesome Neil Young cover for Harvest. And I did this as part of, I got asked to be a guest contributor on Friends of Type, which is a really super rad kind of lettering website that started at the same time as Daily Dropcap. And I love doing historically referential stuff because it's really fun for me to kind of make it my own. And the way that I sort of do that is I never now look at historical references. So what I'll end up doing is I'll have days where, I might go to the library and look at crazy awesome stuff, but I will never bring it home, I will never photocopy it. And then when I get home, there might be a project that I'm working on, and I'll try and kind of draw it from memory. And what happens then is you totally bastardize and idealize and really make it original that way. It's sort of like like, when you try and draw a friend from memory, the picture is the most crazy, fucked up thing you've ever drawn in your whole life. That's like massive lips and eyes somehow every time. And that's how I feel about the illustrative or the historical lettering stuff. If I'm not looking directly at the source, I end up making up a lot of it, and in a way I sort of, idealize it and make it my own every time. So here's a little bit of process. This sketch is actually, I keep looking back because normally the thing's behind me, sorry, I'm just like, check out the back of my head. This sketch is really close to the final, so not all my sketches are quite this refined as you saw from that earlier sketch. But this was for the upcoming calendar that National Public Radio is putting out. So for this one, I totally think of NPR as like the sole wholesome thing that I listen to. Because I don't know about you guys, but I have like so many guilty pleasure playlists. It's crazy. It's like all just teenage stuff and really like, if you follow me on Ardio, you'd be like embarrassed for me. Like it's pretty bad. And same thing with television. Like I don't know how many episodes of Toddlers and Tiaras I've watched, but it should never be known to the public. So NPR, I really wanted to capture that sort of like wholesome, it feels like an old cracker kind of packaging or something. So naturally enriching was the kind of little tagline that I came up for them. So here's sort of a bigger project that I'll show some process for too. So more and more I was getting hired to do more historical-based lettering. And what's really fun about it is there's just so much to pull from. So as a letterer, it's incredibly hard to be bored doing any lettering work. Because unlike with illustration, if you get hired to draw a Christmas tree twice, that Christmas tree is probably going to look pretty similar both times. But if you're getting hired as a letterer, there's just endless styles that you can work within that still feel like they're under the same like umbrella of style that you work in. And so historical lettering, it's almost impossible to be bored doing it. The only thing that is tough is that you get kind of better at doing certain kinds of it the more you do it, of course, like anything. So you have to really push yourself to do things that are different. So this is the sketch for a picture of Dorian Gray. I was hired by Barnes & Noble to do this series of classic book covers. I've done 15 total so far, but I'll show, I think, 6 of the actual covers here, and then a couple of the other ones that are coming out. So that was the sketch, and then this is what the final looks like. So this was such a dream project for so many reasons. For one thing, the actual book covers are leather bound with 2-color foil, which is super rad. I never get to work in really high quality printing stuff. Usually a lot of the stuff that I was doing was for advertising or editorial work. So it's all going in like glossy magazines with like weird non-printing. So this was like a treasure for me to be able to have actual physical pieces of my work that I didn't have to pay for the printing of. And also the reason why it was really magic is I didn't have to leave room for barcodes, which is crazy. Like if anyone's ever worked on a book, you know that they end up putting like some random quote in Times New Roman right on the cover, and you're like, I hate everything about you. But this one, it was like no logos. I didn't have to put Barnes & Noble logo on it or anything. And then no barcode, they just stuck it as a sticker on top of the book. So that was Picture Dorian Gray, Pride and Prejudice, Wuthering Heights, Huckleberry Finn, which is maybe my favorite one, Dracula, and Jane Eyre. So these were, I actually just read Jane Eyre. I didn't read it when I did this book, ooh, confession. Mostly because the deadlines were so tight that they just gave me summaries and told me what to do. Not really, I did my own thing, but you know how it goes. And, but I'm actually doing another classic series of 26 books with another publisher, and I'm trying to read all of them as a goal since I have read like 0 books in my whole life. I transferred high schools at like a weird point that involved no literature whatsoever. So now I'm kind of catching up in my late 20s. And here are the sketches for 2 of the most recent ones, so for Tom Sawyer and Little Women. And so I don't often trace my sketches. I usually do the sketches and then kind of draw from them as I'm working. Just because it's the same thing like when you applied to art school and they were like, I know that you didn't draw this tiger from real life. You know, they didn't want you to trace things from magazines. They wanted you to work from life as much as possible. So I kind of think of working from my sketches this way, like working digitally but not actually tracing the sketches, as a way of kind of drawing from life. So I kind of translate and idealize as I'm working from the sketch. And in a way, I oftentimes make it better. Most of the times I just make it a little more refined. But sometimes I completely change decisions about certain things as I'm drawing it that way. And I work entirely an illustrator almost, except when I work on typefaces. And I use I don't use a Wacom tablet because I hold a pen like in a fist like this. It's really bad. My entire arm is numb within an hour. And I just use a mouse or the trackpad on my laptop, which most people don't understand. But when you draw a vector, you don't need to be painterly at all. You're just plotting points, and it's almost easier to be more precise if you use a mouse. So here's what the final for Tom Sawyer looked like, which is actually pretty similar to what the sketch was if you look at the sketch. So it's super, super similar. I'll leave it up for a second. No. And then here is the final for Little Women, which did change quite a bit because after I sent the sketch, they were not into the dress that was on the cover and decided that, we would instead do a monogram. And sometimes, if an art director trusts you enough, they don't make you do a revised sketch. So that was sort of the case with this. I did the original sketch, they told me what needed to change, and I just changed it in the final instead of sending a new sketch. Very, very, very seldomly does my actual sketch become the final. So I was asked to be a part of this project called the Lolita cover project, which was started by Bertram Architects, and they asked maybe 20 or 30 designers to design their own version of the Nabokov cover for Lolita. And so this was my version. I actually drew all of this just in pencil in my sketchbook and scanned it in and inverted it. So this is a little close-up of the detail, and then that's what the final cover looked like. So this won't actually be produced as a book, it's just produced as kind of editorial content within the book. But I'm really psyched about it, and it makes me want to draw lots of lacy type. Because it took me 8 hours to do, just sitting at my desk doodling. It was like being in 8th grade again and drawing people's names and hearts. It was so awesome. So the more I can do this, the better. And I think I should, and Josh always talks about, you guys will see him talk tomorrow. We talk so much about collaborating, and I feel like this would be a really good way to collaborate. So in the last bits of my own work that I'll show before I get into some type nerdy stuff, and hopefully don't go over time, scripts are kind of my jam. That's what a lot of people end up hiring me for, and that's what I end up doing a lot more recently. So this was just an editorial illustration for More magazine, but it was really fun to work on because I got this crazy awesome photographer, Jeff Kern, to shoot the spread, and there's this insane Victorian-looking hair with flowers all in it that goes across from this. But it was really fun to work with his imagery, and do the lettering for it. And it's very rare that I get to actually really partner up that way, and I love art directors that really know how to do that. Because oftentimes I'm hired and just kind of don't see until the very final bit where my lettering goes. And whenever I can really work from the get-go and get assets to incorporate into my own work, it's really fun. And then I did this piece for Florence and the Machine. They did a poster series that was kind of like a guest artist poster series and asked me and 5 other illustrators to do posters based on their artwork. So this was badass because I've never gotten to work for bands before because most of my work is not cool enough. I don't do super high concept stuff, and it's not all James Victoria-esque and crazy paint marker. So I get asked to do a lot of hey, it's the Lutheran magazine asking you to do a headline about Jesus. And I'm like, okay, whatever. So I don't really get Thurston Moore calling me, asking me to do awesome, crazy stuff for them. So this was one of my cooler projects. But also, they were doing screen prints of them, and I had kind of free reign to determine what I wanted. So I actually ended up having them print this with the navy, with the type knocked out, and then the clouds and stuff were done with metallic gold, and then the type was reprinted on top of it in glow-in-the-dark ink. So it actually glows in the dark. It's really cool. So, it's not the last job I'll talk about. I have to talk about the dream job. So, this was an email that I got a number of months ago, and it says basically hey Jessica, this is Molly from Wes Anderson's new movie. Do you feel like doing some tests for us on the titles to see if we want to hire you to do the title treatments for the movie? And I was like, holy shit! That was sort of my reaction. I was like, oh! And my fiance's sitting on the couch and he's like, what's going on? And I'm like, oh my god! And then I finally told him 40 minutes later after I had had a milkshake and 4 Diet Cokes. So they hired me to do these tests for the movie, and it was super crazy because I had never worked on a movie before or anything like that. This was way too cool out of my range of things I ever expected to be hired for. So I was hired actually actually by the production team. So Molly's a co-producer on the film, Moonrise Kingdom. It actually comes out on May 25th, so really soon. It might already be out here because it premiered at Cannes, so it's premiering in the States on 25th. But anyway, so she hired me, and I did a bunch of tests and got art direction fed from Wes to her, to me. And I was super nervous, and they paid me like $300 to do like 3 weeks of work just so that I could like hire me, please, yes, I want to do it, I don't care. Even though like you should never, the work for free chart, totally abandoned that for a brief moment. But we finally found ourselves at a place where he was happy with it and I was happy with it, and they were like, cool, so do you want to actually do this thing? And I was like, hell yes, of course I want to do this thing. Why else do you think I've been slaving away for the last 3 weeks? So here are some stills from the trailer. I can't show you the actual like beginning of the movie parts yet, but they hired me to do lettering for the beginning of the movie, so it's like all the actors' names and stuff, and like focus features, presents, and all that kind of jazz, and the movie title, and then to do a typeface for the end credits that were going to run. So what ended up happening was I ended up making 2 typefaces, well, 1 typeface in 2 weights, because halfway through the project they were like, okay, cool, so we're just going to find something that pairs well with the typeface because we have all this other material stuff that we have to do and we can't afford to hire you to do lettering for everything. And I was like, no, wait, let me do all this extra work for you. So I ended up making a display weight and a text weight. But what's really rad is that they were so like completely fair to work with that a year after the movie's released I can actually sell it commercially. So be prepared, you can buy this at some point. And what was crazy is that in the meat of the project, I was getting emails like this from Wes Anderson, emailing me doodles with all caps writing from some like email address that sounded fake. It was like, it sounds like a fan made an email address, and that's what his email address is. But I like never like would ever think that I would be emailing Wes Anderson and he would be giving me art direction. But it was really awesome because if you want to, that dude is as particular as you could imagine that he is. So like 2 weeks before the trailer was supposed to go up on Apple, we had worked on it for like 5 months. Everything was cool, they had the files forever. 2 weeks before it was supposed to go up, they called me when I was in Australia on vacation and were like, Wes wants to see a new 0, 1, 2, 4, 7 and lowercase r. And I was like, okay, cool. So I had to wake up at 5 a.m. like for a couple days in a row because I was traveling with a family member and didn't want to ruin her vacation, and draw like the lowercase r for like the honestly 20th time. But the reason why his movies are so awesome is because he is that particular. And you love doing stuff for people that you actually trust their vision, which is so rare. Like I know that like clients run you into the ground a lot, and you never know whether they're just trying to like satisfy some sort of hourly quota or whether or not they actually really believe in the project like you do. And when you can have that much faith in the person art directing you that you know that their heart's in the right place, you just want to like fall over in front of them and kiss their feet. You're just like, I will do whatever you want. I will crawl on my back and do type design while on my back. I don't care. But here's what the display weight and the text weight look like. So it's a really, like they're similar, but the text of course is a little heavier. The contrast is less between the thick and thin. And then the letters are wider, and there's also more space between the letters. And of course the X height is higher. And so here's what they look like next to each other. So most people like would look at this and not be able to tell the difference, but it makes a world of difference in legibility. And all this type design nerdy stuff is something that is totally new to me. You learn some of it in college, but you don't get into the meat of it like you do if you're an actual type nerd. But what was neat is I was getting all this Twitter backlash of people like angry that they didn't use Futura. So there's so many graphic designers that are really in love with Futura apparently because they were like, will it spell the doom for the new movie? And I'm like, hopefully not, because I did that. But here's what the poster looked like. So they've been using the typefaces everywhere, which has been really fun. Just seeing it out and about and seeing people use it like semi-properly, except when they made these like weird Flash things online and typeset it in Flash, which as everyone knows, Flash is an awesome typesetting machine. But I'm really happy that this did come along when it did in my career because I thought that I really knew what I was doing when it came to typeface design a couple years ago, and then I realized I knew absolutely nothing about it. So this came at a point where I had actually sought out a lot more education about typeface design, and I felt a lot more confident in my skills, like legitimately confident, not like teenage like blindness confident, where you're just like, I can drive in the dark with no glasses on, doesn't matter. So I was really happy that it came along when it did. But another thing that this world is sort of opened up to me is that like so many people don't understand what I do for a living, or like what the difference is between lettering and typeface design and calligraphy and all this stuff. And a lot of the questions that I get on Twitter all the time are, what font is that? People look at my work and they're like, what font is that? Or there's all these forums that like show my lettering work, which is obviously like certain ones do look like they could be fonts, but other ones are like, that is obviously drawn. And no one understands that you can actually just draw things. That is a thing that people do, they draw. So people ask all the time what fonts I'm using because they think I'm lazy or something and start with fonts. And I'm like, that's lettering work. And they're like, what's lettering? And I'm like, I can't explain this to you. That's what I'm going to tell the audience right now at a conference in Barcelona. So type nerdery. Everybody's super into type. I blame Gary Hustowit's Helvetica movie because everybody in the world now knows like what Helvetica is and makes jokes about it. I wrote this haiku for you guys. Thought you'd like it. Lettering versus calligraphy versus type design. Lettering is drawing and calligraphy is writing. This is something that not a lot of people know the distinction between, but it makes a huge difference in terms of what kind of jobs you do. So the kind of work that I do is lettering work, which is drawing. I draw everything point by point. When I draw in my notebook, I'm drawing it by pencil. When I draw on the computer, I'm drawing it with individual anchor points in Illustrator. Calligraphers do writing, so they use pens or brushes. With one stroke, they do it. They do it hundreds of times, but they do it until it's right. And the major difference is that calligraphers practice a lot more than letterers do of like certain techniques, because the whole point is like you kind of develop your portfolio of styles that you can work within, and then when you're hired, you can kind of bang it out. You get hired to do like envelopes for a wedding, you get paid a certain amount per envelope, and you're like, pay me. Whereas if I got hired to do that as a letterer, I'd be like, oh my god, this is taking forever. So a lot of times when people try and hire me to do these really massive jobs, I'm like, you should hire a calligrapher because you have $1,000 and they can do it in a half an hour. Whereas it'll take me like, 4 days to do what you need to do. And I also, like, a lot of people had the opinion that like type design can't be that hard, right? Like you're drawing an alphabet, whatever, 52 letters total, upper and lowercase. But as I actually dove into it, I realized, holy F, type design is crazy hard. And the main place that I realized that was at this Type at Cooper program in New York. So it's a continuing program in typeface design that I took I actually dropped out halfway through because it was too hardcore for me, and I realized that I wasn't going to be a text type designer anytime soon. But I learned so much during it, and learned so much to appreciate type during it. And, a lot of people proclaim themselves as type nerds, but don't actually know all the nerdery that really goes into making typefaces. So I'll explain just like a little bit of it here. Most of you guys know the difference between display type and text type, right? Display, use big, text type, use small. And most people know what terrible display type looks like. It's the stuff that you get on defont.com or free fonts or la la la. But there are some people that make crazy excellent display type, and no one actually realizes how insane it is because no one ever opens the glyphs palette or reads the PDFs that come along with fonts. When was the last time you read a PDF that came along with a font? Never. If any of you have, you are like super diligent and awesome, and I high five you. But this is a typeface called Liza from Underwear, which is a Dutch little agency of type designers, and they released this PDF which shows all the crazy awesome open type features of their font. Like there's a feature that it's meant to look like it's done with a brush. So it detects when the brush would have run out of ink and picks up the brush and puts it back down by swapping out characters. You would not have known that had you not read the PDF. This typeface has 1,400 glyphs. Most people do not realize that display type can have that many glyphs. It has 7 alternate U's, which is crazy. And you'd be shocked at I sell my own typefaces, so no one knows how to use typefaces. I get emails from people all the time, they're like, I clicked the unzip file, why isn't it installed? Like tons of customer service that you do not want to deal with, that I should make a PDF about, but no one will read it, and then I'll be in the same predicament all over again. But this kind of stuff is something that a lot of designers don't realize is available to them, and that they can really maximize these kind of typefaces that they're working with. And another thing that I realized is that no one believes type designers are human beings. They have no idea who they are. You know, you're like, oh, it's Adobe, whatever. Like, Adobe's sponsoring this, so I'll make a joke. But, like, everyone's like, oh my god, it's just Adobe. Like, I could totally steal that font. NBD, they're like a big company. But really, like, most